Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. I understand it's a little early. I'm sure most of you had an enjoyable evening. So thank you for pulling yourselves out of bed and managing to join us. The keynote this morning is called Red Notice, Pros and Cons. And I'd like to take just a moment to thank our team here at SecurityFest for hosting us, for being such generous hosts, and for making this all possible for us today. So if we could give them a quick round of applause. We're going to start with a story of epic failure. I had an engagement recently where I felt that I had failed with extraordinary flair, and I wanted to share that as sort of a lesson for all of us. I was tasked with the job of performing a security test, a physical security test for an organization. They limited me to the pretext of behaving as a disgruntled former employee, and I was charged with simulating someone trying to gain access to a specific department within the building. I was faced with armed security guards, because of course this was in the United States, where that is something that is pretty common. And as far as the physical security controls go, this company had everything that we put in the report and count on them never buying. So they had the revolving door turnstiles that were badged in and badged out. They had optical turnstiles at the lobby and revolving man traps that prevented any piggybacking, tailgating, a whole slew of things. And I can recall sitting in front of this building, pretending to be an employee on a break on my phone, just panicked because I didn't know how I was going to get into this building. The company was very focused on testing the human element, so they told us that we couldn't use any hacker expletive to overcome the technical challenges by cloning badges or doing any trickery of that nature. So I was faced with a conundrum. I had to overcome these badged access doors using only people as a tool to get in the building. So I decided that I would use empathy, and I would try to overcome this limitation of the technical considerations that they had in place to gain access to the building, and then try to tailgate through stairwells and into the areas that had elevators. So, thing I learned, it doesn't matter what you do, it only matters what they think you've done. And during this test, at one point, a security guard came out of the building and stood about over there from me, looked me up and down, radioed something back to someone, and I was like, oh no, I've been made. But we're gonna try anyway. You know, don't give up until they call the last bell. Not counting myself out, I decided that I would inject myself into a group of people who were returning from lunch. And I decided I would put myself in the middle of this herd of humans, and I would make myself an obstacle to them gaining entrance into the building and force that need for them to help me so that they could get on with their day, become an inconvenience. And I hoped that I could elicit empathy from an individual to scan their badge for me. Because while I had a badge that looked like an employee badge, it absolutely did not work. So I ran up to this awful thing that will haunt my dreams forever, and I scanned my badge knowing it wouldn't work, and I scanned it again. And then I began to panic a little bit, but I tried to subdue that panic just by looking completely lost and utterly hopeless. And I had a gentleman that asked if I needed help, and I said, it just doesn't look like it's working, and I'm not sure what to do. So of course they all offered advice as to how to flip it around and how to move it and maneuver it and try this and try that. And so internally I'm panicking even more now, because there's two of these doors and people are starting to file around me instead of being trapped behind me. So I hoped that somebody would eventually take pity on me enough to scan their badge. And one gentleman reached down, and just as he was about to swipe it, he looked through the glass and saw one of the security guards, and he went, nope, and turned around to me and said, I think that guards clocked you trying to get into the building. You should probably go talk to them and see if they can help you." And I was like, "Oh no, that's fine. I'll just go around to the lobby." And I tried desperately to run away. At that point, I was like, "I'm going to take off. I'm going to go find my Uber, and I will disappear." But I was caught about 20 feet away from the door by the security guard, who did one of these. And when somebody's holding a gun and they go, "You get over there." So I went over and he walked me into the building, badged me through the door, and took me through the employee-only area of this facility to the front lobby. And he said, "What's going on?" I said, "I'm new. It's my second day. I didn't need to use this yesterday, but it seems like it's not working." And I looked at his face, and his face told me that he was extremely suspicious of me. And he took me through to the front lobby and introduced me to the receptionist, who of course knew I was full of it. And as she looked for my name in the system, she called myself out there as being completely an imposter. She gave me looks that could kill, and she introduced me to the security guard, who I've now affectionately named RoboCop. So he ripped the badge from my belt loop and said, "Where did you get this? This isn't one of our badges," and confiscated it, and then threatened to have me arrested. And I had a get out of jail free card, a letter signed by the client, who had of course ordered the test, but I will not present that unless I am actually in cuffs. And that just is something that I would recommend to anyone, because you never know when you've actually been caught, and you don't want to pull that get out of jail free card too early. At this point, I didn't know it. I assumed that the guards all knew that I was full of it, but it turns out that first guard actually believed my story. He really thought I was a new employee, and he was genuinely trying to help me. And I failed to see that opportunity and pivot to ask him to escort me straight to the department where I was supposed to go in order to reach the goal or achieve the trophy of the test. So at this point, I knew I was cooked. And so I ended up leaving the building after the point of contact for the company saved me from RoboCop. But the lesson here was, sometimes me losing is a huge win for the client, and that's a win for everyone. Because in this case, they proved that having all of this budget and spending all of this money on these extreme physical security controls, which I'm sure they caught a lot of crud for from the executives who said, "There's no way that you need all of this," they proved that that was an investment that was worthwhile, and that the people that they had working in that building understood proper process and procedure and adhered to that. So, of course, I did not have a badge to get me out of that pickle, and it was kind of embarrassing, but at the end of the day, the client was extremely pleased because they validated the use of all of these very intense physical security controls. So with that, our agenda for today, we've covered my epic failure. I'm going to hop into an introduction. We're going to look at a red team overview. We're going to talk about a HEIST, and then effective testing, how security is like an onion, and then a quick conclusion. Introduction. My name is Alethe. I am a security consultant for a company called Bishop Fox. I am on their red team. Shortly after DEF CON 27, where I was honored with a DEF CON Black Badge for winning the social engineering Capture the Flag, I received a series of LinkedIn messages from German CEOs who had seen me mentioned in an article in Der Spiegel magazine and did not understand how it was me that was featured in an article when my experience and prior work history did not match up at all. I was working in market intelligence as a consultant for a staffing company, and they were all completely baffled. So after this adventure in the hobby side of cybersecurity, I ended up moving into cybersecurity as my full-time job, and now I am happy to report that I get to hack companies for realsies instead of just in the context of competitions, and have quite a bit of fun while finding gaps that our clients can remedy and remediate throughout their organizations to make their companies more secure. So you may be wondering exactly how I got here, and most of that origin story is covered in a really wonderfully told story by Jack Rhysider in the Darknet Diaries. I am South African by birth, but American by nature, mostly. About 25% Swedish, that's not a lie, I promise. And I started out in the blue side doing security assessments and helping businesses start to have a security program or to improve very immature security programs, mostly in critical infrastructure, hospitals, water treatment facilities, things like that. Then I realized that being blue is really hard and it's way easier to break stuff. And I enjoy that a lot more. So I was a lot more at home in the offensive security testing universe. And so I moved into red teaming at Bishop Fox last year. So buying a red team is something that can be extremely helpful to the right kind of organization. And I felt it was important to take a step back and just review what exactly is a red team engagement. Most of us are aware of offensive security testing, but breaking that down into a little bit more detail, we have vulnerability assessments, which are very useful to companies that have more immature security programs or who are just starting out in developing security programs for their organizations. This is typically an automated scanner, a combination of automated scanning and human analysts who come up with lists of vulnerabilities and see if they are exploitable within the company, and then advise on how to remediate those. These are also completed typically in much shorter time periods, hours and days instead of weeks. Whereas penetration testing is the next step beyond vulnerability assessments, where we have more hands-on examination by real people and the evaluation of very specific environments. Typically, this involves information sharing from the company purchasing the penetration test, including IP ranges and a variety of other goals that they have in mind for testing. And as far as these tests are concerned, they can be very noisy, meaning that the people who are testing the environment are not at all preoccupied with remaining stealthy. They're typically very noisy, move fast, and try to break things. And these can last for weeks, usually 1 to 3 weeks, with some reporting that is generated following that test. Finally, red teamings. These engagements are beyond both the vulnerability scanning and the penetration testing, and typically have some sort of broad scope with a trophy or a primary goal in mind. This involves multiple attack vectors and can have a variety of different vectors used within the same campaign. It can involve social engineering, which is of course my specialty, as well as a variety of other tools and trickery. The emphasis is on stealth, and the goal is to allow the defenders to be tested and to test their security tooling, alerting, monitoring, and things like that during the course of this test, which can last for weeks, if not months, depending on the scope and the breadth of the landscape of this test. We've had a variety of different types of tests where we will emulate insider threats within the company. We'll have people that are issued accounts within the company and they perform things like job searches, looking for new jobs on LinkedIn, and the blue team can then see if they're notified of this type of behavior through the rules and the alerting that they have. And then of course we have what most people think of, and that is getting into the network and trying to steal proprietary information and other sensitive types of things. So if you haven't caught on yet, the entire talk revolves around quotes from the movie Red Notice. And I wanted to emphasize that with red teaming, I don't have to win in order for you to lose. And that's the best part of this whole thing. It's actually awful. The problem here is that a lot of times companies will purchase a red team and they will mix this task up with penetration testing. So they expect that they're getting a pen test, but they purchase a red team and they're not ready. So they set me up to fail, they set my team up to fail, and they set themselves up to fail because they're purchasing something that they're not ready for and that they can't really realize the full benefit of. So penetration testing versus red teaming. Red teaming is objective-based adversary emulation. It's authorized, goal-driven simulation of an advanced adversary attack against security defenses. And this is to expose any weaknesses and help the company improve the resiliency while actually simulating an incident. We do things where we'll actually deploy ransomware on a network, and we'll have the blue team defend against that to see how their tooling and everything works. And in an incident where there's no actual negative repercussion, similar to a tabletop, but more scary. What a red team is not is bug or vulnerability hunting, risk or process auditing, policy or compliance review, and of course, it is not standalone phishing or vishing exercises. So which companies benefit most from a red team? With low security maturity programs, most companies in this category can benefit from the automated testing and perhaps dabbling in some lower pen testing. Wireless, external, internal, those types of tests are perfectly fine and encouraged, especially where there's compliance-driven requirements for low and medium-sized organizations, low and medium security maturity organizations. For high security maturity organizations, red teams are fantastic because we assume that you have flying colors as far as the vulnerability scanning and the pen testing goes. You've checked all the boxes, you've remediated all the problems with those, and now you're ready to take it to the next level. So the companies that benefit most from red team engagements are those that have a high level of security program maturity and are ready to see if their blue team can respond to a real attack without that risk. And that is what our team will simulate. So the HEIST. Red team assessment knowledge types. There is open knowledge sharing, which is sometimes referred to as white box testing, where the company shares everything. So in the context of a social engineering focused engagement, they would share the contact information, email addresses, phone numbers, all of this stuff up front. Then for a medium-sized knowledge sharing, or some white and some black box, this type of gray box testing, there will be some things that will be revealed to cut that time needed for reconnaissance, but ultimately the red team would be responsible for finding a lot of the bits of information that they need in order to fully exploit the vulnerabilities that they discover. And in black box testing, this is a simulation of a true attack where the attacker has no knowledge of the company and is responsible for performing all of that reconnaissance, doing all of the vishing ahead of time, and calling employees to elicit information so that they can put together a more comprehensive attack or encourage people to take actions that are not in the company or their best interest. So most red teams will start from this closed knowledge or black box stance, and then as this progresses, as it becomes clear that the red team either can't find the information or it's not available, then sometimes they will expand the scope of the information that is given to the red team to allow them to maximize the benefit of the red team engagement for this client. So I'm a good guy, but sometimes I do bad things. Yes, people pay me to do bad things, but I promise it's for good reason. I was tasked with, in another engagement, Grand Theft Auto. My mission was to steal several automobiles from a service yard of this company vehicles that contained company laptops and other equipment. The company also had armed security guards on site and patrolling the facility. This organization had both service and construction-focused workers on site. There were also very tall walls with very large spikes on the top. So going over the wall wasn't really an option, though my colleague decided it would be best. I said, absolutely not. I was not going to fling myself over an 8-foot wall with very tall jabby spikes. This building also had badged access at all of the doors, but it did have gates on either side of this construction lot where all the service vehicles were housed. One gate on one side was an entrance, and this had a human security guard sitting in a booth. But the other one, which was on the other side of a building, did not have a guard, and it was an automatic gate that would roll open and then shut behind the trucks that left it. So my colleague and I decided that we would do some reconnaissance. We sat outside of the exit gate, hiding from the human guard, but on the surveillance cameras. We observed the personnel, their schedules, the activities that happened within this service yard. We figured out that most people were getting there quite early and typically clocking out mid-afternoon and driving home. So there was a huge influx of traffic leaving this lot in the early afternoon to mid-afternoon. And we decided that we would take the path of least resistance and just reverse tailgate in off of one of these trucks that were leaving. So my colleague went around to go check the wall out, and I decided that I would loiter by this gate in full view of the camera, but using a motorcycle carport as kind of an aid to block the line of sight between myself and any of the trucks that were leaving this yard. And after the second one left, I made a beeline for the gate. And as the gate was closing, I managed to slip in without getting hit by the gate. It wasn't going quite as fast as I thought it was, but it also wasn't going that slow either. But I didn't want to run because adults, fully grown adult humans running in public is typically something that makes people nervous. And I was wearing like a pantsuit, so I looked a little more corporate, so that would be even more strange. So I dipped past the gate and went to the first vehicle because I figured if I get stopped by a security guard, I at least want to prove that I tried to obtain the trophy. And the trophy is steal the trucks. So I managed to check 13 trucks, and of the 13 trucks, I was able to start and potentially drive 10 of them. They all were unlocked, the keys left in a cup holder or even in the ignition, and this was exactly what this client wanted me to prove, was that they had an insecure facility, that their team was disregarding process, and that it was easy for anyone off the street to just walk into this gate and take one of these vehicles and leave with it, and potentially access to the corporate network through the computer that is affixed inside of this vehicle. So we managed to walk around, test more things, confront more people, make eye contact with several people, and by being noisy and just acting like everything was normal, we managed to avoid any suspicion. The guard never even walked over to see what we were doing. And upon exit, I said, check that fire extinguisher and make sure it's compliant, as 3 trucks left, and we loitered by the gate and managed to slip away clean and get into the getaway vehicle, which was a very nondescript Toyota, and run away. So the benefit to this type of test for this organization is that they were able to identify these vulnerabilities, assess their ability to detect and respond to this type of threat. In this situation, that response was non-existent and the detection unclear, but it seemed like nobody detected us. And then able then from there to garner the budget from the executives to put more advanced physical security controls in there, as well as train humans to adhere to the process and to challenge people that were on site for valid identification and authority to be in that space. So, effective testing. Everyone is vulnerable, everyone is a target. And with that, I would discourage companies from disregarding certain groups or functions of the business from testing. We've had a lot of instances where companies will say, yes, you can phish anyone, just leave our executives out of it. Because of course, those people are immune to phishing. So limiting the audience without justification is something that I discourage. Also removing the technical controls that would prevent phishing to allow phish to go through at the very start of the engagement is not beneficial either. Full white box phishing, I would encourage most companies to just disregard this type of testing because it doesn't really offer much value if you're taking down the guardrails that are meant to prevent phishing in the first place. You want to test and make sure that those email filtering and other blocking capabilities are functioning as expected. Reading the blue team in. With a red team engagement, you absolutely do not want to do this. You want to see that they will respond as if this is a real threat and measure the success of that team to do that work as if they're testing for something that is real and not being complacent because they know that it's a test. And of course, please don't warn employees that there's a phishing test happening. And I say this because it's actually happened to us. Expecting perfection from security awareness training is also something that I caution people against. We can't rely 100% on training. And being surprised when people fail despite training is something that isn't really beneficial for companies either. I've done security awareness training. I've shown employees the exact email phish that I will send them with the exact same subject line and the exact same trigger and hook. And I test them the next week using that exact template, and at least one person will fail almost every single time. And to mitigate these types of threats, the only way that we can stop them is by putting additional technical controls and guardrails around humans, because we as people are just susceptible to this type of manipulation by nature. None of us could exist in a world where we were distrustful of everything. And as people in communities, we have this desire to be collaborative and cooperative because we understand that it's for the greater good that we work together as a society in general. And then, of course, limiting your testing to one type of campaign is also something that I would discourage. So only doing email phishing or phone phishing or SMS phishing exclusively is not going to give you a full viewpoint of your weak spots. So you can have excuses or results, but not both. There was a campaign recently where I received 0 clicks. And I know I just told you somebody always fails, so what the heck is going on here? This was an email phishing campaign. We had a selection of employees that were provided by the client, and we had open communication of the testing timeframes with these individuals, as well as prior approval of each of the email templates and inclusion of the points of contact in each email campaign. So when we sent the campaign to these contacts, our points of contact also got a copy at the same time. This was a 2-stage phish. The first phase is, of course, the link that's in the email, and the second is that the user will be responsible for putting their credentials in on the phishing site in order for us to have success. So we sent this using a very wicked pretext that emulated a SaaS service that they used and claimed that there had been several login attempts to their account and they should investigate this type of activity immediately if it was not them. So from this campaign, we received 0 clicks on the first stage, nothing, nada. And my coworker spent so much time making that phishing site, I felt terrible. Our points of contact were pleased, but they didn't seem surprised. And during the phone call following this campaign, I'd asked if anyone had reported the phish. And of course they said, yeah, people reported it. So I followed up that question with, how many people reported it? Just about a ballpark, any number you can guess, it doesn't have to be exact. And I got crickets, absolute silence. And so at that point I knew something fishy must be going on. And it seemed that this client had potentially warned employees. And this is something that I had never experienced before, because all the companies that had hired us with the low maturity to medium maturity, they were desperate for accurate results. They wanted to legitimately test their teams. But this company was much larger, and the people who purchased the test weren't the people who were conducting the work with us. And they didn't want to have a negative report on their ability to train and secure their company. So it looked like they had, in fact, warned everyone. And they did confirm, however, that the email had arrived. We'd bypassed all of their filtering, and the emails had arrived in inboxes. So for the second campaign, I decided I wouldn't take this for an answer, and the gloves came off. So I decided I would send another campaign that was 2-stage, and I decided that I would oh, sorry. For all I know, you could be the bad guy and I could be the other bad guy. And that's pretty much directed at this client because they were acting also as an adversary of their own company. So in the second round, I decided the gloves were coming off and that I would send the initial campaign to the target employees that we were testing. Then I would wait 15 minutes and send a second campaign to the point of contacts. So the targets would receive the email 15 minutes before the point of contacts were aware that it had been dispatched. I then managed to send the campaign towards the end of our testing timeframe. So if they'd approved from 6 a.m. to 12 noon, I sent it closer to 12 noon. And this was in an attempt to hopefully encourage them to forget this was happening that day. And the pretext was expected to be effective, but was less compelling than the first one. This one was an overdue HR task in another platform that was related to a dress code. This is probably the most classic, common email phish that exists, the dress code change. And I knew that most people would be able to identify that as a phish, but I wanted to see if my hypothesis was correct. So in this situation, I had 4 of the targeted individuals click the link. 1 person entered partial credentials, and 2 people entered full credentials, which we later confirmed during our internal testing were their legitimate credentials. And at that point, I knew the first time around, they lied. The lesson from this, security is like an onion, and this type of testing is very important, but it's most important to realize that no one measure can really provide complete protection against email phishing and the tactics used by red teams as well as legitimate attackers. So email security is super important. Web filtering is also important. This is the first line of defense, really, when it comes to email phishing in general, and it really messes up my day quite frequently. Employee awareness training is fantastic, but you want to make sure that you're demonstrating a culture that encourages reporting, as well as the executive buy-in, which is very important because this is a top-down thing. If your executives are excluded, or if they don't participate in training, you're setting an example to the other members of the employee population that this is not important, and they won't take it as seriously. Delivering training through a variety of different methods is also significant and crucial because not everybody learns the same way. And testing resistance is great, but be sure not to fall into the trap of this compliance-driven and just generic template testing that we see so often, marketed as the answer for these types of things. Secondly, assume that there will be a failure at some point. Make sure that there is a plan and that that plan is both practiced and validated through testing of your incident response plan and your team's ability to execute those things. Does it make sense? Are we contacting the right people at the right time? Did somebody call the cybersecurity insurance company? Finally, the catch-all recommendations of software updating and patching, security monitoring, and threat intelligence, things like Alien Vault and the FBI's InfraGard portal are great for threat intelligence feeds. And finally, the thing that will stop me in my tracks, and this is not just MFA, but the universal second factor or the token-based authentication that requires a device in order to connect a user to their account. This is something that will stop most attacks that I would level at a company in its tracks, because the requirement of this device in order to access the account and to authenticate is something that an attacker cannot replicate even with full credentials. And the story that I have associated with this that would have been stopped dead in its tracks is pretty awful. I had a client who had a pregnant employee. She was very pregnant, very distracted, and as a mom I can completely relate. But she received a phishing email that encouraged her to visit a known website that they used at that company. She clicked the link to log in, and as she logged in, the attackers were monitoring for the receipt of credentials, and they immediately sent her a false authentication code request. And she was able to approve that request on her device, believing that she had logged into the legitimate account instead of the phishing account when the attacker had used her credentials to log into the authentic account and initiated the request for the multi-factor authentication approval from her device. So believing she logged into the authorized account, the MFA message was expected, and she said, sure, fine, and that attacker was able to gain access to her account. And because this company had a very low maturity with their security program and the tools and the budget that they had for secure licensing and higher defenses and tooling. This company was compromised pretty badly, and the attacker was in the network for over 100 days before they realized it. So there is one last thing you should know. Trusting a thief can be dangerous. So thieves can appear legitimate, and the only way to prevent human failure is with a combination of technical controls around our humans, along with the strict enforcement of company procedure. If humans follow the process and they follow the procedure, and we have the technical controls in place that prevent phishing to the best of our ability, we have a much better shot of preventing these types of attacks from occurring in the future. I get foiled by browsing rules, for example, and I had a user that received a phish from me and actually replied for tech support. So tech support, this is Red Team. The only confirmation that I had from this campaign that I received a click on my malicious link was that one of the people who clicked was very frustrated that they could not view this brochure of swag for free stuff that they wanted. So when they responded, they said, "I can't view your brochure." And I said, "Really? That's so weird. Well, let me send you this file that I have on this Google Drive, and you can view the brochure there." And so I was able to happily tech support this person into compromising themselves, and I really hope that they enjoyed thinking that they were going to get a t-shirt or a mug. But ultimately, the browser is what stopped me from initial success. And that was because the domain that I was using was not aged over 2 weeks, and immediately the browser said nope. So the only way that I knew that I'd had success with a click was that this person had self-reported, and the team was able then to adapt and overcome the struggle of the browser by then pivoting into delivery of a Google Drive document. So in conclusion, can't run a con without gaining the mark's trust first. That's page 1. So humans are naturally very likely to fail for simple cons, or fall for simple cons and scams. It doesn't take a fancy tool or a really, elite method of hacking to compromise humans in most cases. This is because we live in societies where that collaboration and working together and unity is encouraged, and we want to be helpful. And being suspicious of everyone isn't healthy. You can't live in that high state of alertness your entire life. You won't have any great relationships with people, and you'll probably be somebody that people don't really want to hang out with. So beating these human characteristics out of our population doesn't fix the vulnerability. And we can't expect everyone to always identify when they're being manipulated. That's just not logical. So an assumed breach scenario is where we decide to pivot from the external attack as a red team into a more white box or gray box style test, where we assume that the human will fail and then take the next action inside the network to give that benefit of the red team experience to the client by giving them what happens next in the event that their external protections did prevent the red team from having success. The benefits of this are that it will help the team map the attack paths, and it will often illuminate the dangers associated with an insider threat, whether that is witting or unwitting, somebody who's been compromised or somebody who's just a jerk. And we can identify those through different social engineering schemes as well as technical hacking once we gain that lower level access within the company. This also helps to reduce the cost of the red team engagement. We're spending less hours doing reconnaissance and looking for information that can help us get into a company or to manipulate humans in order to gain the same outcome. And this is something that companies can pivot into to still see benefit from a red team in the event that they were able to stop this external access. So finding the right red team. Some companies have extremely mature programs. They have large volumes of staff, and they can dedicate a specific team within their internal organization to do red team campaigns against the company and report back. as to their efforts, collaborating sometimes with the blue team to have that more purple team approach where there's a battle between the two, so to speak. Then there's also the external red team, where consultants, security consultants such as myself, are hired to emulate that adversarial attack and give a completely unbiased report out of the red team engagement. This can also be beneficial on an annual basis for large organizations with very mature security programs to give them an accurate depiction and unbiased exposure of any open vulnerabilities or gaps in their processes. So, in closing, never become complacent. I had a medical research facility that contacted me for a vishing or phone phishing engagement. They were very confident that they would pass with flying colors because they did regular email testing and their click rates were super low. So I put together 3 pretexts, one for each of 3 departments they wanted to test: human resources, IT help desk, and their executives and executive support team. And I had 100% success with every single call that I made. I elicited information, or I encouraged, in the case of their IT help desk people, I still feel bad about this, everybody went to the malicious link. And so it's one of those things where we can have a really false sense of confidence, and it's important to keep testing in a variety of ways and make sure that we are not relying on garbage metrics to give us this false sense of confidence. I had a client recently who said, yeah, we want you to do this 100% black box. We're not going to give you the IT help desk number for your pretext to make that work, so you're going to have to find it yourself. So I spent a day looking around, trying to find an onboarding PDF or some computer use policy that was buried on the internet somewhere for this company, and I didn't manage to have any success. So one of my teammates on a call with the client was like, she'll just call and get it. And I was like, dude, don't commit me to that. What if I can't get it? So I let them know in our instant message, like, I'm going to go ahead and call. I'm calling the main number. They might transfer me to somebody, but I'm going to try to get your internal IT help desk number right now. And they said, sure, we're anxious to see the results. Very low confidence. So I put that message in. I made the phone call. I managed to spoof the number, talk to the reception person, talk to somebody in IT, get the number, and notify them that I had the IT help desk number for your internal employees in under 2 minutes. They were not pleased. I said, is this the number? And they responded with, you can use it. So continuous process improvement and testing is vital. We can't become complacent. We have to make sure our people are adhering to processes and hold them accountable for doing those things, because that is what prevents this lapse in human judgment and the compromise of humans through manipulation. Sometimes it sucks to say no, but we have to. And then, of course, validation of plans, procedures, and playbooks will make a huge difference during an actual incident. I run tabletops quite often, and unfortunately, it is like the top finding that the team never pulls the plan out. Nobody ever actually gets the plan out and follows it, despite the fact that everybody knows this is a tabletop and this is what we're supposed to be doing. So what are they going to do in an actual incident? And then training and exercising these plans on a regular basis so everybody's familiar with what to do. Nobody wants to be reading the instructions on the fire extinguisher while the fire is raging. This is not a coincidence, this is a plan. So we want to give people the sense that this is something they understand, that this is what is supposed to be done, so everybody knows what to expect next, and this becomes second nature and habit, rather than something that people are trying to make up as they go, which happens a lot. So in closing, red teaming is by far the most effective and holistic method of emulating how an attacker would likely compromise your organization. It brings to light issues that you wouldn't otherwise have considered and highlights tools and processes that are both effective and ineffective, enabling you to streamline investments by defining where you are struggling most. Your organization can enhance detection and response and decrease the risk of an attacker finding any known vulnerabilities. Thank you once again for joining us, and to SecurityFest for the invitation to Keynote. It's been an absolute honor, and everybody has been so welcoming. I'm eager to see the remaining conference talks, meet everyone, and enjoy the sunshine that we have been blessed with this week. please connect and follow both me and Bishop Fox on social media. They made me say that. And I would love to continue talking with everyone about your ideas, what you're working on, fun projects, and visiting with folks towards the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was amazing. Before we let you off the stage, do we have any questions from the crowd? Right here.
Yes. First, thanks for a great presentation. Do you have any recommendations for setting clear boundaries with your client when performing kind of these on-site social engineering attempts? And do you have some sort of recommendations to how, when you're actually sneaking into the company, how to keep track of these things?
Yes, so it's very important to set both the scope and rules of engagement ahead of time and have that included in the contract that you sign with the client. Make sure that you have that get out of jail free letter, that it states clearly when the testing time frame is, your name as it appears on your ID, and then a wet ink signature from the person who is standing by for your Mayday call. During the actual test, you want to make sure that you are clear on what those rules of engagement are, the scope, and then any trophy items. What's the goal of the test is something that you want to define up front as well. Do they want you to get to a specific department, the finance department, for example? Do they want you to take a specific piece of hardware, a computer, a laptop? Do they want you to plug into something? Make them detail that instead of just saying, do whatever. Because if it's very vague, then in that case, you can get into trouble when they don't realize what you're capable of.
All right. Anyone else? Yeah, over here. 1 second.
Hi, it's about the theme of phishing and phishing simulation. You never mentioned that as an option or the effectiveness. It's not the training, because that's not very efficient, we've learned, but rather the simulation tools, fake phishing attacks by tools, and the effectiveness of that, if you can elaborate.
Of course. So with the regimented phishing testing, whether you're doing monthly, quarterly types of phishing tests, those are typically white box, where you're doing it from inside the network, and those emails are landing in every person's inbox. And this is good as a training tool to support training and give people an opportunity to fail in an environment where there's no negative repercussions. But I think that it gives people a false sense of confidence, especially inside of the security program, that if we just do phishing tests, then we'll be fine. And so I wouldn't rely on it. It is a good training tool, but it shouldn't be relied on as a form of bulletproofing an organization against phishing. For companies that have extremely robust security programs, the teams that run those security training programs can oftentimes become complacent. I've run those training programs for companies as a contractor, and it becomes tedious. People begin to spot the common templates, and what a red team does is it actually creates more customized and highly focused templates that can zero in on people and specific departments and emulate a real attack. People have gotten pretty good at spotting some of the more scammy ones. So if you want to do regular phishing tests, I would encourage doing more custom pretexts and also testing your controls to keep phishing out of the organization in the first place, as well as doing that white box testing to use as a training tool. So it is good, especially for low to medium maturity companies that are just kind of getting into training people and making them aware of the risks of phishing. And it's something that I would encourage, but I just wouldn't rely on it as something that's going to guard the organization against phishing.
All right, do we have anyone else over here?
So when you talked about red versus blue teaming and how it was easier, at least for you personally, to get into red teaming, would you, if there was a new company or a company with low maturity level in terms of security, would you advise them to set up a blue team or red team, or would you advise them to look into purple teaming?
For a low to medium maturity security program, absolutely the most benefit is to invest in the defensive side of the business first. You want to build up that blue team. You want to acquire tools that are going to enable you to defend that company from a technical standpoint. That might mean more advanced licensing that gives you access to security tools from some of the larger software providers. It may also mean just having enough humans to monitor the network, or outsourcing that monitoring to an external SOC or another entity to do the 24/7 monitoring that you might need, but can't afford to have in-house. Once the organization is at that level that it has a really high security maturity, then it makes sense to start looking into investing in the third-party consultant red teams. And only when a company has, massive global maturity does it really make sense to dedicate a team of individuals to red team activities exclusively. This is just from my experience with the clients that I work with. It's typically the Fortune 500 that will have their own internal red team. Most companies will hire different security vendors to give them that same type of threat and adversarial emulation without having the expense of the payroll to keep people on staff in that function.
All right, I think that's all the questions we have time for. So please join me once more in thanking Alethe for this great keynote presentation.